Thank you. Please sit down. We are at India Foundation privileged to acknowledge the presence of His Excellency, Honorable President of Maldives, Ibrahim Mohamed Solih. We are also greatly honored for the presence of His Excellency, Honorable Prime Minister of Sri Lanka, Mr. Ranil Wickremesinghe. He is also the chairman of the organizing committee of this conference. We acknowledge the presence of His Excellency, the Honorable External Affairs Minister of India, Dr. S. Jaishankar. He is also the vice chair of this conference. We acknowledge the presence of His Excellency, Honorable Minister of Foreign Affairs, Singapore, Dr. Vivian Balakrishnan. He is also vice chair of the organizing committee. And we welcome His Excellency, Honorable Foreign Minister of Maldives, Mr. Abdulla Shahid, who is again a vice chair of our conference. Ladies and gentlemen, as you know, this is the 4th edition of the Indian Ocean Conference organized by the India Foundation, the last 3 being at Hanoi, Colombo, and Singapore in that reverse order. We are also very grateful for the presence of 25 ministers from 17 countries, speakers from 35 countries, and delegates from 40 countries. Thank you very much for being here. May I now request, ladies and gentlemen, please rise for National Anthem of Maldives and India.
जनगण मन अधिनायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता पंजाब सिंध गुजरात मराठा द्राविड़ उत्कल बंगा विंध्य हिमाचल यमुना गंगा उच्चल जलधि तरंगा तव शुभ नामे जागे तव शुभ आशीष मांगे गाहे तव जय गाथा जन गण मंगलदायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता जय हे जय हे जय हे जय 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 हे.
Please sit down, ladies and gentlemen. I have great pleasure in inviting Honorable External Affairs Minister, Dr. S. Jaishankar, to make his welcome remarks. Sir.
Your Excellency, the President of Maldives, Your Excellency, the Prime Minister of Sri Lanka, Your Excellency, the Foreign Minister of Singapore, Your Excellency, the Foreign Minister of Maldives, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure to welcome you all to the Indian Ocean Conference 2019. I've had the privilege of being part of this journey from the time the first conference started in Singapore and then saw it move to Colombo. I missed the last one, but I'm really delighted to join all of you today. This conference is taking place as we are witnessing the reinvention of the Indian Ocean from being an ocean of the south to the ocean of the center and possibly the ocean of the future. As the world's third largest oceanic division, 2.5 billion people with an average age of under 30 and countries with some of the fastest growing economies, the Indian Ocean region is key emerging geopolitical region, not only of current strategic import, but also of future significance for mankind as a whole. Indeed, in the 21st century, the sea has again become central to the existence of humans on the planet, both in terms of an economic aspect, where oceans witness the complex interplay of oil routes, sea lanes, onshore and offshore assets, and security elements, and in terms of an ecologic aspect, where our very life and survival depends on the generous and sustained endowment of resources by the oceans. Traditional and non-traditional security challenges address these two dimensions respectively, and any narrative about the oceans must necessarily include these two dimensions in sync. With nearly half the world's population projected to reside in the Indian Ocean Rim countries by 2050, nowhere else in the world is the pursuit of economic prosperity and physical security in the midst of competition, contestation, and change more intense than in the Indian Ocean. It is therefore only natural that the Indian Ocean region faces the most difficult challenges in the domains of traditional and non-traditional security. Existing instruments of national policy and international law are perhaps not fully adequate to tackle these challenges, and they have to be complemented by effective regional mechanisms which rise above the complex regulatory landscapes and the divergent development needs of the countries of the region. Since 2016, the Indian Ocean Conference series has been successful in complementing the existing regional mechanisms of cooperation between the governments of the littoral states. But the real utility of this conference lies in its ability to go beyond the diplomatic, military, and governmental mandate in defining and addressing issues and in determining their relevance to the people of the region. We must work towards developing our regional cooperation structures in a way that allows us to handle questions of maritime pollution, environmental degradation, and sustainable exploitation of resources. This year's conference focuses on traditional and non-traditional challenges. It's extremely well-timed. It carries forward the thematic clusters of issues discussed in previous years: comedy, commerce, and culture in 2016, of peace, progress, and prosperity in 2017, and building regional architecture in 2018. Once again, I welcome you all to this conference, and I'm sure it will be very productive.
Thank you, sir. May I now invite Honorable Minister of Foreign Affairs, Singapore, Dr. Vivian Balakrishnan, to address the conference.
Thank you. President Ibrahim Mohamed Solih of the Maldives, Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe of Sri Lanka, Minister for External Affairs of India, I can say good and old friend Jaishankar, Minister for Foreign Affairs of the Maldives, Abdulla, Shahid, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be here for the fourth consecutive year of the Indian Ocean Conference. I say fourth consecutive year because I have attended every single one of them. Singapore, Colombo, Hanoi, and now here. I should also say that as I look back on these four versions, I remember with great fondness and sadness the former Indian External Affairs Minister, Sushma Swaraj. She was a guiding light and inspiration and energetic dynamo for this conference. And I'm sure many of you here will also recall her contributions. She believed in this cause. She spared no effort. When the Indian Ocean Conference was first convened in 2016, there were already signs that the existing international order was beginning to fray at the edges. The collective commitment to international security and multilateralism had started to waver. And to add to this, the ongoing evolution of the Fourth Industrial Revolution and the changes that this has demanded of our own citizens. All this has led to the emergence in many countries, including our own, to the emergence of populism, nationalism, and anti-globalization. And since 2016, these trends, in fact, have worsened. The effects are clear and visible. We watch with anxiety rising military tensions, major disruptions to trade and our supply chains, and indeed, a deep uncertainty about the future of international multilateral institutions. Two of the world's biggest powers are engaged right now in a destructive trade war. And we are also struggling to manage flashpoints related to competition for dwindling global resources. And as the world's major powers become increasingly assertive of their own interests, the hitherto hard-won consensus on international rules and norms is breaking down in front of our own eyes. The countries in the Indian Ocean that depend on open trade and freedom of navigation for survival have to contend with this increased uncertainty. And we are the first to feel the effects of these shifts in the international environment, and quite frankly, we are also going to be among the first to suffer the consequences. On top of all this, changes on the geostrategic front, our physical environment is also facing an existential crisis due to climate change. We all know the Indian Ocean is getting warmer. The sea levels are rising, the corals are being bleached. And every year, we witness a successive new record in terms of warming temperatures. And we know that these rising temperatures mean an unsustainable environment for the plankton, which in turn affects the fish, and eventually means less fish for fishing and food for human beings. The beautiful coral reefs, and we are here in the Maldives, home to some of the most beautiful corals in the world. These coral reefs are being bleached and are dying. And this does not bode well for all of us. The Indian Ocean is home to thousands of islands and atolls. The Maldives alone accounts for more than 1,200 of these islands. And I don't need to remind the audience or the residents here that each one of these is under threat. We are right now standing, I think, in the world's lowest lying nation. I believe 80% of these islands are less than a meter above sea level. And if the sea levels rise by 1 or 1.5 meters by the end of the century, I believe a country like the Maldives could lose up to 77% of your land by the turn of the century. This must therefore spur us into action, that this is an urgent situation, and we need to persist in our commitment to implement the hard-wrought Paris Agreement on climate change, which I would add Maldives and Singapore as fellow members of AOSIS and small states. We worked very hard to arrive at that global consensus. And yet we know that that global consensus, even on climate change, is also under threat. So much has changed since we first met in 2016, and we're dealing with evolving complex issues. And my point today is that we need more than ever before to rally together for our collective survival. In Hanoi last year, I mentioned 3 principles to guide our cooperation in the Indian Ocean. The first was an open and inclusive regional and international architecture grounded in ASEAN centrality. The second was for all of us to have a clear economic agenda, which in turn would support free trade. And we have to do this in order to generate economic growth and good jobs for our people. And the third point was that we still need a rules-based world order. These are the fundamentals that have been the formula for peace and prosperity in the Indian Ocean for the last 7 decades and still remain relevant today. And we need to translate these principles into actions even as we face this evolving situation. I'm aware that the Indian Ocean is a collection of geographically and very culturally diverse states. However, we all share a common strategic imperative, a common conviction in the factors that promote growth, and a common recognition of the conditions which we need to thrive. Let me share just 2 points on how we can take ownership of our own developmental agenda and growth, and how we create a more conducive environment for prosperity. The Indian Ocean's economic potential and strategic location have made us very attractive partners for larger countries further afield. And we are being courted, for better or for worse, by one side or the other. And these interrelated relationships will shape and define the politics of our region. How should we respond to this evolving political landscape? I think our answer should be to strengthen, to reinforce, and where necessary, reform our multilateral institutions and mechanisms, and most important of all, uphold a rules-based world order. Let me draw the example of ASEAN, since the majority of ASEAN member states are in fact part of the Indian Ocean family. We in ASEAN have always guarded against being forced to make invidious choices, and thereby preventing Southeast Asia from becoming an arena for great power rivalry or an arena for proxy wars. This same imperative, I believe, applies to the Indian Ocean. Fortunately, if you look back in the history of the Indian Ocean, it has never been an arena for large-scale warfare, and I believe all of us want to keep it that way. The next point I want to make is on connectivity. We believe it is key for us to capitalize on the opportunities of the new economy. Indian Ocean ports are well connected by maritime trade routes and the projects like the India-Myanmar-Thailand Trilateral Highway, which enhances overland connections as well. Air connectivity is vital for tourism and an important driver for economic growth for many of us in this region. And I think I don't really need to make that argument in the Maldives. With 1/3 of the world's population here in the Indian Ocean, the potential for us to grow intra- and inter-regional tourism is massive. And the leaders of ASEAN and India recognize this potential. And that's why in January 2018, India and ASEAN set out the Delhi Declaration on our collective vision for ASEAN and India to strengthen aviation and maritime connectivity, including through the expeditious conclusion of the ASEAN-India Air Transport Agreement and the ASEAN-India Maritime Transport Agreement. Singapore is also pleased to have just signed an open skies agreement with the Maldives during President Solih's state visit to Singapore just 2 months ago. We will continue to work with our partners to bring the two regions ever closer together and to realize the economic potential within. Similarly, we need to reaffirm our commitment to economic connectivity. Trade is the lifeblood that sustains Indian Ocean nations. 80% of the world's maritime oil trade flows through these sea lanes. The 12 African Indian Ocean nations signed on to the African Continental Free Trade Area, which came into force in May this year. Sri Lanka's first modern and comprehensive free trade agreement signed with Singapore came into force in May last year. This region also recognizes that economic connectivity is essential for our livelihood and jobs. And that's why we have devoted so much time and resources on concluding the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, which is, if we settle it, brings the 10 ASEAN countries together with our 6 partners, India, China, Japan, Korea, Australia, and New Zealand. This will be the world's largest free trade agreement. Digital connectivity is the new frontier for regional cooperation, and the ongoing digital revolution opens up many new possibilities for the far-flung countries across the Indian Ocean and all the atolls dotted in between. So there's much scope for both sides to forge closer collaboration, also as we forge and help to spread smart cities across our entire region. We as member states need to invest in building the digital superhighways that will facilitate long-distance connections amongst our people and enable instantaneous cross-border payments. And this is not just about fintech for its own sake, but about expanding opportunities for small and medium enterprises, for artists, hawkers, people who work with their hands to access a regional and global market. We are familiar with the story in Kenya and M-Pesa, a mobile payment system, which has helped to lift 1 million Kenyans out of extreme poverty since it was introduced in 2007. And even as we are inspired by that story, we need to do similar things in our part of the world as well. So let me conclude. 4 conferences on, we are all agreed that we want an Indian Ocean built on peace, security, stability, and prosperity. We have remained committed to facilitating dialogue and to building trust, strengthening multilateral mechanisms. And as the global issues of climate change and anti-globalization continue their tide, I hope this conference will generate concrete responses for us so that we can respond cohesively, collectively, and forge our own independent collective future. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much, sir. You have really charted our roadmap for future work, a bit of academic research, and see how far we can move forward. I have great pleasure and honor to invite His Excellency Honorable Prime Minister of Sri Lanka, Mr. Ranil Wickremesinghe, to address the conference.
Your Excellency, President Mohamed Solih, President of Maldives, Your Excellency Vice President Aziz Ahmed of Maldives, Honorable Subramaniam Jaishankar, Minister of External Affairs India, Honorable Vivian Balakrishnan, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Singapore, Honorable Abdulla Shahid, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Maldives, Your Excellencies, Honorable the Ministers, distinguished guests. May I preface my address this afternoon by paying tribute to the memory of Her Excellency Sushma Swaraj, my good friend, who was also a distinguished former Minister of External Affairs of India. My friend Vivian Balakrishnan knows the effort she took to make a success of this fora. at a time when she was recovering from a prolonged illness. I did not expect her to make that journey to Hanoi. But her commitment was such that he was there with us. And all of us who knew her will miss her. But thank you. We must thank her and remember her for the contribution she's made to this conference. It's always a great pleasure and honor to be back in Maldives, a country with which Sri Lanka has multifaceted, warm bilateral relations stretching back thousands and thousands of years. When Maldives emerged as an independent nation on the 26th of July, the Prime Minister of Sri Lanka, immediately commenced the diplomatic relations. Therefore, I would like to place on record our appreciation of the arrangements made by the government of Maldives for the holding of this conference and its success. We are living in an increasingly uncertain world, confronted by a triad of critical threats. Of immediate concern is the possibility of the first major downturn in the world economy since the global financial crisis. The World Bank has forecasted that the global GDP growth will slow to 2.6% this year from 3% in 2018 as a result of rising trade barriers, renewed volatility in the financial markets, and a sharper than expected downturn in a number of major economies. The investment bank, Morgan Stanley, recently warned that the risk of a global recession is high and rising. At the same time, the splintering of the rules-based order makes the coordinated global response that was deployed during the global financial crisis more difficult to replicate. Worryingly, the World Trade Organization's dispute resolution body is on a course to cease functioning by December, which could mean that global trade rules and protocols that took so many years to develop will become unenforceable and thus essentially defunct. The risk of beggar thy neighbor trade policies, which would affect small countries disproportionately, is therefore high. It is certainly a setback to our nations, which are seeking to expand trade relations both within the region and outside. The increasing economic uncertainty has been accompanied by rising global tensions. The shifting dynamics of the global economy and the emergence of new powers are creating an asymmetrical bipolar world with USA and China leading the growing tensions. From Middle East to East Asia and beyond, we are facing antagonism between states on a scale that has not been seen since the end of the Cold War. At the same time, various multilateral bodies established over the past few decades to resolve these issues are now showing severe strain. Once again, the G7 meeting recently in France did not produce a formal communiqué and arguably did more to highlight the differences among key world powers on a number of crucial issues rather than agreements on the way forward. Since our last meeting in Hanoi, we are witnessing the heightening of tension between USA and China, with Indo-Pacific being the pivot of the relationship. The US has declared the Indo-Pacific to be a priority interest. China too has responded with the Defense White Paper 2019. As we are all aware, this tension between the US and China is also changing the security temperament of the Indo-Pacific. This was evident at the Shangri-La dialogue this year. It is estimated that by 2030, Asia will surpass North America and Europe combined in global power based on GDP, population, military spending, and technological investments. New consumer markets are emerging all across Asia, and the Asian middle class is expanding very fast. Of the 4 largest economies of the world, the US, China, Japan, and India, 3 are located in Asia. This shift of global economic balance of power to Asia has resulted in an asymmetrical bipolarity, with US and China coming to the center. Very significantly, the Indian Ocean states account for around 16% of world trade, outperforming global trade volume growth in the post-financial crisis area. With around 20% of global container traffic passing through the Indian Ocean ports, the region's growing importance in the world's shipping market is an established fact. Today, Indian Ocean also accounts for 23 of the world's top 100 container ports. The Indian Ocean is a vast web of energy trade. Around 25 of globally traded goods, 70 to 8% of China's energy imports, and 90% of Japan and South Korea's energy imports flow through the Indian Ocean region. Global energy needs are expected roughly to double by 2030, with India and China accounting for nearly half of the new growth in demand. With such heightened economic activity, maritime security concerns are inevitable. All these political economic developments have led to the most pressing challenge, which is the tripolar competition in the Indian Ocean. The Indian Ocean is tipped to become a theater of contemporary global geopolitics, with India and China on one hand, and USA and China on the other, competing for the space. The competition is helping not only to drive a build-up on naval presence, but is also spilling over into securing vital strategic maritime routes. This growing geostrategic competition amongst established and emerging powers in Indo-Pacific have far-reaching consequences, with many of the powers looking to actively maintain or extend their control or influence. It is likely that the tension at sea will rise. It is vital that all maritime players realize the risk inherent in destabilizing the maritime order, as there are binding economic interests that necessitate a greater degree of restraint and cooperation. For China, securing the sea lanes has become a preoccupation with its Belt and Road Initiative, with its intent on building roads, pipelines, and ports in friendly countries around the Indian Ocean. For India, China's growing presence in the Indian Ocean is a source of concern, especially in the South Asian neighborhood. Since independence, Sri Lanka has opposed military rivalry in the Indian Ocean. We will continue to champion peace and stability in the region. It is for this reason that Sri Lanka took a crucial role in the UN Law of the Sea Conference. We are for a regional arrangement which accommodates the legitimate interest of all stakeholders. Regional arrangements that are not aimed against any stakeholder. Hence, we oppose area access denial. This is our policy of openness, and openness essential for our development as the hub of the Indian Ocean. Therefore, Sri Lanka advocates the freedom of navigation and security of undersea cables in the Indian Ocean. Undersea cables are as vital as sea lanes. Both have to be protected. Undersea cables had not acquired adequate importance at the timing of the drafting of UNCLOS. Hence, the existing provisions are inadequate for this purpose. Any interference with the undersea cables will lead to an immediate breakdown of all modes of communication, playing havoc with financial systems and other vital lifelines of contemporary life. Therefore, the protection of the undersea cables requires special attention. I have no doubt that successful dialogues and negotiation on the sea lanes and undersea cables in the Indian Ocean will help to reduce tension in the Indian Ocean. In fact, the gradual reduction of tension in the Indian Ocean is certain to have positive effects on the Indo-Pacific region, as we must ensure that pressures arising beyond Indian Ocean in the Pacific does not spill over to our sphere. Freedom of navigation has been the strength of the Indian Ocean since time immemorial. The prosperity of ancient Sri Lanka was built on this freedom. Hence, we would like to reiterate our support to a rules-based order for the freedom of navigation that builds on UNCLOS. It's also necessary to react on matters not adequately referred to UNCLOS. For example, the recent track 1.5 consultation in Colombo pointed out that Article 94 of the UNCLOS, specifying responsibilities of flag states of the high seas, require further elaboration and clarification. The successful Track 1.5 Indian Ocean Conference held in Colombo identified the need for a high-level political meeting. Our plans for such a meeting were disrupted by Easter Sunday bombings. We will be announcing new dates for such meetings. In our view, this is the only mechanism available at present to discuss and reach an agreement on the freedom of navigation of the Indian Ocean. The Track 1.5 conference endorsed our proposal for the Indian Ocean Development Fund and called on the competing donors and other stakeholders and littoral states to work towards raising required financial resources. Today, the terrorist activities of the ISIS have become a priority security issue. The harrowing events that took place in Sri Lanka on Easter Sunday, as well as the other recent terrorist attacks, are a pressing reminder of the continuing threat from violent non-state actors. Terrorism remains one of the most serious problems of contemporary societies, as terrorism, financing, extremism, and youth radicalization poses unprecedented challenges. The Easter bomb explosions confirm a change in ISIS strategy. After the setbacks in West Asia, the ISIS has turned its focus on South Asia. The 2016 bombing in Bangladesh, the 2017 in Egypt, and the 2018 in Indonesia are such indicators. This is the franchise form of terrorism, a new challenge, where religious affiliations claiming allegiance to the ISIS carry out attacks. Sri Lanka believes that robust domestic counterterrorism legal framework, which complies with international law and respects democratic rights, is essential for the states to counter this growing threat. But it must also be coupled with greater regional cooperation to combat the growing transitional dimension of modern terrorism. Yesterday, President Solih and I agreed that our two countries will develop measures of closer cooperation to counter IS terrorism. We are also looking to collaborate with other friendly countries. The assistance of Interpol in sharing the databases of known and potential terrorists in Sri Lanka and many other countries is welcome. But we must also focus on enhancing national capacities of the countries in the Indian Ocean through technical assistance and enhanced intelligence sharing. Resolving this issue will take time, but will also succeed in diffusing the tension in the Indian Ocean. This conference must provide leadership by calling a meeting of all stakeholders interested in counting ISIS terrorism. These are dire necessity. Obviously, it will be another mechanism for support within the region. The need for cooperation in combating non-traditional threats is an issue which has been accepted by many stakeholders. Already, a number of initiatives have been launched. What is required is to build a successful dialogue on these initiatives. They will serve as a stepping stone to discuss the other issues related to the sea lanes of the Indian Ocean. In addressing both traditional and non-traditional challenges to secure Indian Ocean, the gaps in legislation covering territorial waters of the littoral states in the Indian Ocean, varying ability of littoral states to extend adequate surveillance, as well as infrastructure, technical and human resource capability, and capacity for law enforcement remain an impediment. Sri Lanka also remains committed to preventing transnational crimes such as illegal, unreported and unregulated fishing, piracy, trafficking of drugs, weapons, wildlife, as well as people smuggling. These are many other issues regarding our region to which I will make a brief reference. Sri Lanka's engagement in the Maritime Safety and Security Working Group of IRA is another manifestation of Sri Lanka's commitment in maintaining the maritime safety and the security domains connected to the Indian Ocean. Sri Lanka hosted a meeting of the working group to finalize the work plan for 2 years. The Track 1.5 conference made a set of useful recommendations for stakeholder action, strengthening cooperation on combating non-traditional threats, which are a less contentious issue, can successfully supplement the efforts to build on more difficult issues related to the freedom of navigation. Security measures backed by a normative framework based on UNCLOS, for example, the UNCLOS primary prosecution model, can be expanded over the whole region. The escalating trade tensions between US and China, coupled with what is seen as US pivot towards a protectionist stand, is adding to the geopolitical rivalries between the two economic giants. Despite such as those between US and Chinese tech giant Huawei, is a symptomatic of the both parties' eagerness to dominate the next major global technological revolution. The challenges we face is to make progress on economic cooperation despite these tensions and regional indifference. The littoral states of the Indian Ocean need regional trade integration as well as expansion of external trade. Similarly, the modernization of infrastructure of these states over the next decade and a half requires nearly 20 trillion US dollars. Hence, it is not surprising that we look upon the mega regional infrastructure initiatives, maybe the Maritime Silk Route, maybe SAGA, maybe the Japanese Partnership for Quality Infrastructure, maybe the EU strategy on connectivity with Asia as a means of obtaining such economic resources. Finally, the full potential of the Indian Ocean economy can only be realized by reducing the trade barriers and ensuring liberalized trade within the region, thereby ensuring gradual regional trade integration. Since our initiative to reduce trade barriers has not brought results, it is best that the ongoing sub-regional, bilateral and multilateral discussions on these issues be taken to a successful conclusion as an initial step rather than launching new regional initiatives. In Sri Lanka, we recently signed a landmark trade agreement with Singapore. This seems to be the highest quality agreement in South Asia and can form a template for the spread of additional bilateral agreements across the Indian Ocean region. Of course, countries should continue to liberalize unilaterally at an appropriate pace too. After successfully regaining GSP plus preferential trade access to the EU and concluding this agreement with Singapore, we have agreed to negotiate further agreements with Thailand and some of the other ASEAN states. Negotiations are also underway for a new trade agreement with China and an expanded trade agreement with India. If successful, we will be one of the few countries in the world to benefit from preferential access to the Chinese, Indian, and European markets. We are also willing to undertake trade negotiations with the UAE once they leave the EU. With the world increasingly turning to the ocean for food security and mineral resources, the emergence of the concept of a blue economy has brought about new challenges. Managing resources extraction in a fair, equitable, and a sustainable manner. Indian Ocean coastal states share a keen interest in the management and conservation of the region's vital resources, whereby fisheries is a key aspect. Fisheries and related industries are critical in ensuring food security, and the impact of overfishing and the climate change has accelerated the reduction of major fish stocks. Considering the challenges in this sector, an Indian Ocean Action Plan for sustainable conservation management, development, and utilization of Indian Ocean fisheries resources is an urgent imperative. Climate change is a global reality today. While countries close to the North Pole are faced with the impact of melting glaciers, small island states like Maldives are faced with the rising of ocean water levels. According to German Watcher's Global Climate Index 2019, Sri Lanka is second in terms of being affected by extreme weather events and weather-related loss events. The issues relating to sustainable development in the Indian Ocean region are today centered around the discussions initiated by IORA. Therefore, it's necessary that we utilize our forum to ensure that these discussions are brought to a successful conclusion. IORA is the platform for discussing sustainable development. It is essential that agreements are reached on this within the agreed timetable. To do so, we must also be willing to establish an effective, coherent governance mechanism within the IORA to conduct these negotiations and to ensure its implementation. This, if we fail to do so, we cannot expect IORA to make any substantial progress. The Indian Ocean regionalism has been hampered to a large extent by conflicting national interests, the lack of will by many of the littoral states, the absence of a result-oriented approach. All these factors have led to the question whether there is a future for Indian Ocean regionalism. Therefore, multi-layered approach to regionalism, together with other proposals and recommendations put forward here, have to be given serious attention by this forum. The available options to create a regional architecture is limited. We have to promote Indian Ocean regionalism step by step. And that, I think, is the main task of this conference. We have met on 3 occasions. We have discussed these issues exhaustively on these 3 occasions. Now we have to decide how are we going to achieve success, how are we going to implement it, and work towards our goal. That being the aim of this, to me, is the aim of this conference and the follow-up conferences that we will have. I'll leave you to deliberate on these issues and wish you all success in the final outcome.
Thank you very much, sir. You have pointed at the future trajectory of the multifaceted strategic challenges that we face in the Indian Ocean. And as the chairman of the Indian Ocean Conference, I'm sure we are going to hoist these points and deliberate these issues. I have great pleasure to invite His Excellency, the Honorable President of Maldives, to give his talk.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe, Vice President Faisal Naseem, distinguished foreign ministers, distinguished representatives of the Indian Foundation, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamu alaikum and a good evening to you all. Welcome to the 4th edition of the Indian Ocean Conference, entitled Securing the Indian Ocean Region, the Traditional and Non-Traditional Challenges. It is our pleasure to be your co-host along with the Indian Foundation. I hope your journey here has been pleasant and the arrangements made on your behalf excellent. Ladies and gentlemen, consider these simple facts. The great ocean that our countries call home boasts 40% of the world's oceanic trade, half of its container shipping, and 2/3 of its maritime oil trade. Its sea lanes of communications are oceanic highways, providing sustenance and commercial opportunity for over 2.7 billion people. The strategic significance of its critical straits from Malacca in the east to Hormuz in the west, attracts the attention of the world's nations, ensures to ensure their access to waterways and their continued freedom to navigation. It is more vital than ever to regularly convene forums such as this so that together we can effectively resolve our common concerns. At the heart of our concerns should be ensuring the security and prosperity of our peoples. The three priority areas that we will focus on during this event: ensuring navigational security, addressing the ever-looming threat of terrorism, and protecting our marine ecology, are essential to that security and to our continued well-being. With regard to navigational security, we cannot overstate just how important this is to the Maldives. The ocean has been our lifeblood since as far back as our history reaches, the territory of the Maldives being comprised mostly of water. Even today, ensuring the regular and safe flow of commerce, cargo, and maritime travel in accordance with the provision of the United Nations Convention for Law of the Sea is paramount. Further, effectively policing our territorial waters and vast exclusive economic zone of approximately 1 million square kilometers is vital to preventing illicit maritime activity, including human and narcotics trafficking, and to safeguarding our essential fish stocks from encroachment by foreign vessels in the form of illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing. The Maldives will implement measures internally to increase our maritime domain awareness while partnering with neighboring militaries for joint patrols and exercises such as the ones we presently conduct with Sri Lanka and India in the name of the Dosti trial exercises to safeguard our waters from trespass and illegal activity. Unfortunately, terrorism and violent extremism has become a regular threat in the 21st century. Its driving factors include geopolitical strife and the various cultural and economic dislocations wrought by globalization are no strangers to our region. No, unfortunately, are the opportunists who take advantage of vulnerable young minds and twist religion for their own sinister ends. We are reminded of these sad truths on the Easter Sunday of this year by the cowardly terrorist acts perpetrated on our neighbor and friend Sri Lanka, which killed so many innocent people. It is essential to upgrade our security measures and facilitate information sharing across regional intelligence agencies in order to meet and fully eradicate this menace. To be successful in this endeavor, we must also candidly address the underlying factors which drive violent extremism. Preserving the integrity and diversity of our marine ecology is also another crucial priority area for our collective security that we will be discussing during this conference. Particularly alarming for the Maldives has been the deep decline in the Indian Ocean's fish stock that are so essential to us as a source of dietary sustenance and economic enterprise, with tuna-based products comprising the bulk of our exports. To truly understand the gravity of the issue, we must reflect on the Atlantic Ocean's state failure to prevent the complete collapse of its northwest cod fishery stocks, because the precautionary measures they too prove too little, too late. If tuna stocks in the Indian Ocean suffers a similar fate, it will have a devastating impact on all our communities and small island states such as us in particular. The Maldives will do its part to ensure that we will abide by sustainable fishing practices, and we enjoin all our international friends and regional partners to do the same. Ladies and gentlemen, in truth, we cannot meet any of these challenges well if we are lacking effective institutions that can properly regulate and oversee progress in all of these spheres. We must be honest and acknowledge our shortcomings in this regard. The Indian Ocean region, especially in its South Asian core, is one of the most fully integrated regions in the world. This is costing us not only in terms of effective collaboration on substantial issues, but also materially as well, consigning our people to a slower pace of economic progress. Consider that interregional trade in South Asia comprises a dismal 5% of our collective GDP. Contrast this to ASEAN countries' 25%. It has been estimated that if we reduce our non-tariff trade barriers within the Indian Ocean region, we can increase our collective gross national product by $568 billion, underscoring the great loss we suffer by not doing our utmost to facilitate political and economic linkages between us. The Maldives is keenly resolved to increase the scale and depth of all our cooperation across the entire expanse of the Indian Ocean. We believe that this is the best accomplished through effective regional organizations dedicated to such ends. One organization which is fast becoming the main vehicle for providing for the Indian Ocean a coherent governance framework has been the Indian Ocean Rivers Association, which since its founding in 1997 has brought together the littoral states of our ocean into a formal body devoted to increasing the well-being of all of its people. Joining IORA has been a long-standing foreign policy goal of the Maldives for many years. We are elated when at the 18th Council of Ministers meeting held in Durban, South Africa last year, we are finally approved for membership. This decision will be formalized at the 19th Council of Ministers meeting, which will be held next month in Dubai. As the Maldives prepares for membership in this important organization, we will lay the groundwork for proactive involvement by engaging on every single one of the substantial policy issues relevant to the Indian Ocean. This conference provides us a wonderful opportunity to do just that. We are keen on learning from the collective expertise of our distinguished panelists, speakers, and guests so that we can in turn make our positive contributions to the many spheres of common interest that we share. I'm eager to hear from all of you, and I hope that this forum proves a fruitful one, which will aid us in our overarching goal of building a more secure and prosperous Indian Ocean region. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Excellency, for those remarks, and also being very generous to host this conference here in Male. Thank you very much. We'll have a felicitation and presentation of memento. First, may I request India Foundation representative to be here, please? Come up. Okay. I request Honorable Prime Minister of Sri Lanka to present a memento to the Honorable President of Maldives. May I request the Foreign Minister of Maldives to present a memento to the Prime Minister of Sri Lanka. May I call upon Mr. Shaurya Doval, the Board of Governors of the India Foundation, to kindly come up and present a memento to the Foreign Minister of Singapore. May I invite Mr. Adrian Tan, to come up and present a memento to the External Affairs Minister of India. May I invite Ms. Loza Ali, the Director of FOSIM, our partners in the conference, to come up the stage and present a memento to the Foreign Minister of Maldives. Now we request the Foreign Minister of Maldives to make the vote of thanks.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. His Excellency Ibrahim Mohamed Solih, President of the Republic of Maldives, His Excellency Faisal Nasim, Vice President, Chair of the Organizing Committee of the Indian Ocean Conference, Prime Minister of Sri Lanka, His Excellency Ranil Wickremesinghe, Vice Chairs of the Organizing Committee, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Singapore, His Excellency Vivian Balakrishnan, and External Affairs Minister of India, His Excellency Dr. Jaishankar, visiting ministers, cabinet colleagues, delegates, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and a very good afternoon to you all. These islands are to be reckoned as one of the wonders of the world. There are about 2,000 of them. This is how the famed Moroccan explorer Ibn Battuta described Dibat al-Mahal, or the Maldives, in his book Ar-Rihla, published about his travels to the Maldives, Ceylon, India, and this region in the 14th century. Ibn Battuta was also fascinated by the Maldivian culture, and its national identity was truly a blend of various travelers passing through and sometimes residing in these islands. The Maldives was the most important link for traders from the Middle East taking over the Indian trade routes in the 10th century. Travelers from Basra traveled into Southeast Asia, made their first landfall in the Maldives. Cowrie shell, found abundantly in the Maldives, was widely used throughout Asia, including as legal tender in Bengal Sultanate and the Mughal Bengal. Basket smoked red flesh of black bonito loaded in the Maldives were exported to Sindh, China, Japan, and Yemen. Therefore, to think of the Maldives is to think of the Indian Ocean. 99% of the Maldives is water. These waters are our life, our source of food, the lifeline of our country. Ours is a country that is more aptly named as a large ocean state. These waters, this sea, this ocean that surrounds us defines what is to be Maldivian. To come to the Maldives is to come to the Indian Ocean. Thus, it was and has always been that the rise and fall in fortunes of the Indian Ocean and its inhabitants is intimately connected to the fortunes of the Maldives. It is then fitting, and perhaps even a bit overdue, that a conference dedicated to the discussion and deliberation of the threats and issues of the Indian Ocean region is held here in our country. Looking at the Indian Ocean from the Maldives, it is perhaps easier to assess the seriousness of the threats such as climate change, marine pollution, marine terrorism, piracy, and mercenary attacks. From here, we can see firsthand the impacts of climate change on coastal communities, how the risk of rising sea levels can impact lives and livelihoods, how ocean degradation can impact on food we eat and the air we breathe, and also how important harnessing the resources of the ocean in a sustainable manner is essential to sustaining our economies. Ladies and gentlemen, we see from here, too, the importance of safeguarding and protecting the stability and security of the Indo-Pacific region, the importance of ensuring the freedom of navigation, maritime security, and addressing the hindrances to that freedom, including piracy and organized crime. It is therefore an honor for the Maldives to host the political leaders and stakeholders in this region, opinion makers and change leaders from around the Indian Ocean to our shores to deliberate on the future shape and order of the Indian Ocean region. Mr. President, Mr. Prime Minister, and ministers, your presence here shows your keenness and interest in contributing to and leading the deliberations that will help the cause of progress and prosperity in the Indian Ocean region. In the Maldives, President Solih has directed the course or course correction to be more precise and placed the Indian Ocean security as the most important item on his foreign policy agenda. Our approach to the Indian Ocean is upholding the international maritime law and norms and working communication and working with our partners in protecting the sea lines of communication. And we look forward to starting conversations here that will continue to be meaningful in managing threats to regional peace and security. I thank President Solih for his presence here today and his personal commitment to enhancing relations with our Indian Ocean neighbors. I also thank the India Foundation and the Rajaratnam School of International Studies for partnering with the government of Maldives in this important endeavor. The themes of this conference, while holding special significance for the Maldives, are also essential for securing the future of our shared home, the Indian Ocean, and the entire humanity. Our conversations here today will undoubtedly contribute to the discussions around the global challenges and pave the way for meaningful solutions. I wish to thank you once again for your presence. I leave you with the hope that during these deliberations, you also have the opportunity to experience the beauty of this country and the hospitality of our people. I thank you.
Thank you, Excellencies, for providing direction of the future deliberations at the Indian Ocean conferences, the present one, and also to India Foundation for areas which we need to address. So we thank you very much on behalf of India Foundation, and I request ladies and gentlemen to rise while the dignitaries leave. Please don't leave the hall because our keynote address by our Honorable Foreign Minister is at 6:15.